What about NATO expansion? Did they keep their promise? No. NATO kept expanding towards our borders. So it was a lie. Of course, what is happening in Ukraine, first of all, it's not about Ukraine. Ukraine in this situation is just an instrument and a victim of the neo-colonial policies of the West. And the root of this crisis doesn't go back just 1 year. It's much, much deeper. Maybe 30 years ago, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What is happening now, the leaders in the West, the Western media call it unprovoked Russian aggression, which is absolutely untrue. If we want to understand the cause of this conflict, we have to look back, first of all, at what happened just before the collapse of the Soviet Union and what happened in 2014. You know that Russia and Ukraine were part of the same country for centuries during the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. We are one nation, basically. We see Ukrainians as our brothers and sisters, and we don't have any hatred against Ukrainians. And I would like to draw your attention that yesterday, on the 25th of February, our president have given an address to the parliament. And he specifically stated that we're not conducting a war against Ukraine. If you want to call it a war, it is a war in a sense that the West has waged a proxy war against Russia using Ukraine as an instrument. And again, our president has said that the policies of the West, which are the cause of this crisis and which are to blame for the tragedy that is happening with the Ukrainian people. Of course, these policies are hypocritical and criminal by essence. And also, he said that now the West has become a symbol of lies and hypocrisy. So if you remember, after World War II, Germany has been divided into two countries, the Eastern and Western Germany. Basically, Germany was divided, yes, and Europe was divided in two so-called camps, the socialist camp and the Western Europe. So, according to the agreements reached after World War II, and may I remind you that our country obtained victory, it was our victory. We were those who defeated the the German Nazi, and we had our troops in Eastern Germany. When Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union, he reached an agreement with NATO and the United States that our troops will be withdrawn from Eastern Germany. In return, they promised us not to expand NATO to our borders. We kept our promise, as you know, all the world knows. We withdrew our troops from Eastern Germany. In 1989, Germany reunited. What about NATO expansion? Did they keep their promise? No. NATO kept expanding towards our borders. So it was a lie. They never intended even to keep this promise. But for us, the red line was Ukrainian accession to NATO. And it is also very understandable. If you look at the map, Ukraine, which first time in history after 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, became an independent state, it's a big country. It's a country that, well, before the operation started, was the largest country in Europe after Russia, bigger than France. And the border that we had with Ukraine was 2,000 kilometers long. So if the NATO military infrastructure comes to the border with Russia, it poses a direct threat to our security. We were trying to convince the West that we need to build a common architecture of security. We were trying all our best, all diplomatic efforts to make the West, NATO and United States hear our concerns. Our concerns were ignored, and Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, actually made a statement that Ukraine wants to acquire nuclear arms and become member of NATO. So for us it was absolutely unacceptable. Still, we tried to solve it all by diplomatic means. And also I would like to remind you that in 2014 there was a coup d'etat in Ukraine, when supported by the West. Where is democracy in that, when an absolutely illegitimate government comes to power as a result of a very bloody coup d'etat when many people were killed in Ukraine? And this government starts to have very Russophobic policies. And for your understanding, in Ukraine, first of all, everyone speaks Russian. Then around 50% of Ukrainian citizens see themselves as ethnic Russians. And they want to speak their own language. They want to develop their own culture, to be able to send their children into Russian schools. But the first thing that this government that came to power under President Poroshenko in 2014 starts doing is to try to ban Russian language. Try to ban everything Russian. Try to convince the people in Ukraine that Russia is the enemy, etc., etc. 3 regions of Ukraine, which are predominantly Russian, Crimea, Lugansk and Donetsk, protested against this policy. They didn't want to accept it, but you know, how would react people in Bali if the government would want to ban Balinese language or Balinese culture? Will they be happy? Of course not. So the people in the eastern part of Ukraine started to protest. Instead of trying to solve this situation by dialogue, by peaceful means, what Kyiv does, sends troops to these regions. Crimea voted, they staged a referendum and voted in favor of joining Russia. Lugansk and Donetsk proclaimed their independence. As you know, Crimea joined Russia and we protected these people. But the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, who are Russian, ethnically Russian, were under attack for 8 years. 14,000 people killed. Have you ever heard about this in Western media? The West was just ignoring this, just saying that nothing is happening there, everything is fine, and still supporting Kyiv. Again, for 8 years, we were trying to solve this issue. We supported the Minsk agreements, which were signed between the leadership of Lugansk and Donetsk and the Kyiv government, and which presented a very clear roadmap how to solve this conflict. They never did it. They never did it. They were continuing attacking military, killing people, destroying civil infrastructure, bombing houses, hospitals, schools, etc., etc. And it was evident that by the beginning of the year 2022 that not only they have no intention to implement the Minsk agreements, actually now there were statements from the Western leaders, from Angela Merkel, for instance, who supported this agreement, who guaranteed these agreements, that actually the West didn't have any intention to implement it, or make Kyiv implement it. It was just a trick to gain time and to arm Ukraine meanwhile. I think the situation is much worse now during the Cold War. Yeah, first of all, we see a real military action happening in Ukraine, because it's not about Ukraine. We see now that the confrontation now is Russia against West, and by West, of course, I mean United States and their allies. And it's very clear, you know, the main result, I would say, from our part of this operation, of course, we freed the regions of Ukraine occupied by the Nazi forces and Ukrainian armed forces, which are Nazi in essence. And we are progressing steadily, as our president said yesterday, steadily and carefully, but we are progressing. The operation is progressing, and we are sure that all our targets will be achieved. But also the result is that we have no illusions now on what the West is about. And you can see it in the statements by Western leaders that they don't want to allow Russia to win. Because if Russia's win in this crisis, in this operation, it means the defeat of the neo-colonial policies of the West. And that's what they cannot agree with and cannot allow. They're just using Ukraine. If you ask me why are they attacking Russia, the answer is very evident, because we don't agree with the Western dominance and with their neo-colonial policies.
Thank you.